Elizabeth Omotara Santos, known as Tara by some, was a native of Florida living in Wasilla, Alaska, and was described as very sweet and kind. In the summer of 2020, she traveled to 7711 Rovina Street in Anchorage, Alaska, to visit a friend by the name of Lizette Hogland Hall. She had just broken up with her live-in boyfriend of 10 years, Dustin Kirpius, and told friends she was afraid of him and wanted to get away and hide from him for a while and clear her head. While at her friend Lizette's on August 8, 2020, Elizabeth was tragically stabbed multiple times. According to her family, the following is what occurred. While at the home of her friend Lizette and Lizette's son Desmond, Elizabeth was stabbed. Once police arrived, Elizabeth was incoherent and couldn't speak clearly because of the excessive internal bleeding. Despite this, they shockingly handcuffed her and placed her in an ambulance, all while she was bleeding to death.
Relax. Okay, let's go.
Elizabeth, get up.
Okay, we're just gonna walk down the stairs. Walk it over here. Ma'am, stop. Come on, we're trying to help you. Yeah, over here.
Then the ambulance did not depart the residence until 37 minutes later. And then not long after arriving to the hospital, Elizabeth would die from her injuries. Apparently, Lizette and Desmond told authorities that the stab wounds were all self-inflicted. Strangely though, Lizette was noted to have scratches and bruises on her face. Also, she was found to be cleaning up blood from Elizabeth while the crime scene investigators and officers were present. Here is a more concise timeline of events. Lizette admits that she and Elizabeth began fighting at 6 o'clock that morning on August 8, 2020. Officers with the Anchorage Police Department arrived at 6:16 a.m. and found Elizabeth in an open robe, mumbling and writhing in pain and incoherent. Officers believed she was under the influence. They stated that her wounds didn't appear serious, despite documenting that her robe was saturated in blood. They noted that she was close to losing consciousness, but before that, she was able to get the spelling of her name out. At 6:42 a.m., they handcuffed Elizabeth after Lizette whispered to the officers that Elizabeth had made the mess. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and someone in the background can be heard yelling at Elizabeth to get up. At 7:20, the ambulance has yet to leave with Elizabeth when she goes into cardiac arrest. They then finally leave at 7:23, 1 hour and 6 minutes after police first arrived to the scene, and nearly 40 minutes after the ambulance arrived to the scene. Police did not take Desmond or Lizette in initially and left them at the crime scene. It wasn't until physicians from the hospital contacted law enforcement to report that Elizabeth had been stabbed in the legs and abdomen, and an investigation was needed while she went into emergency surgery. It was then that police decided to bring them in for questioning. Meanwhile, Lizette had access to Elizabeth's cell phone and had allegedly gone into it. The pair had an entire hour to dispose of any evidence at the scene and change clothes if they wanted to before police returned. Elizabeth's sister, Nikki, states that she received a call from Elizabeth's phone during this time. When she answered, expecting to hear her sister's voice, she was surprised to hear a woman screaming that Elizabeth owed her money and had some holes in her. Footage shows Lizette being handcuffed and she and Desmond being driven to the police station in separate vehicles. This footage shows Desmond was not handcuffed despite being a suspect and was even smiling in the back seat of the cop car. Lizette has a criminal record that includes multiple assaults. In the recorded interrogation audio between Lizette and an investigating officer, Lizette allegedly makes multiple contradictions to her story.
And I just started like saying, Desmond, call 911, call 911, and I ran upstairs.
Where was Desmond at? Is he upstairs or downstairs?
He was downstairs, but I don't know if he was in the bathroom or in his bedroom.
So downstairs?
Yes,
Okay.
he was downstairs. And so I ran upstairs.
So wait a minute, so I just want to go back, I'm kind of like a detail-oriented guy. So as you're on your back and she's trying to claw you, bite you, how are you defending yourself?
I'm just kind of like blocking.
So you have your hands in front of your face
Yeah,
right now.
I'm like
hands
blocking,
up, just blocking.
yeah.
Okay.
Just blocking.
And then does she eventually stop?
No, I mean, I guess not. Only because I like got away from her.
How did you
and ran
get away
upstairs.
from her?
Like I just kind of like scooted my way and ran upstairs and I told my son, call 911, and then he brought his phone. I didn't even call from my own phone. My son, I thought maybe my son called, but instead he brought his phone upstairs, and he and I hid.
She states that Elizabeth had been acting strangely for the past couple of days while staying at her house. She said Elizabeth attacked her, and she blocked her attack trying to defend herself, but she never hurt Elizabeth, and she and Desmond just ran and hid in her bedroom from Elizabeth. She said she didn't see her injuries until after officers arrived. They said they could hear her in the kitchen making weird noises, and that they didn't come out until police knocked on the door. Desmond lawyered up and to date has not made a statement. After 12 p.m., Lizette was told by the investigator that Elizabeth had just died of her injuries. At this point, Lizette begins changing up her story a little bit, but neither Desmond or Lizette were charged with any crime. At first, Anchorage Police Department insisted that they were treating Lizette and Desmond as suspects and had collected extensive forensic evidence such as their fingerprints and DNA swabs. However, the detective involved in the case and the supervisor of the homicide division allegedly to date have refused to process any of the DNA, fingerprints, or any other forensics collected according to her family. Also, her family has said that the authorities overseeing the case have been exceedingly nonchalant, dismissive, and sarcastic, insisting that her fatal injuries were self-inflicted with 2 different knives. Statements from Elizabeth's close friends and associates who have known her for years all state that Lizette's story makes no sense and that Elizabeth was not a violent person and did not use drugs. The only person interviewed by the APD with anything negative to say about Elizabeth was her ex-boyfriend, Dustin Kirpius. Not only did she just break up with him before her tragic death, but he was a friend of Desmond's. The day after her death, some witnesses claim that Lizette told them that she had watched Elizabeth harm herself. She has also allegedly told many different embellished stories to different people. During the search of her phone, it was discovered that during the early morning hours before the stabbing, Elizabeth had repeatedly called many acquaintances of hers, but no one answered. Her family has reached out to their local media on numerous occasions, yet they continue to bury the story. The news reportedly refuses to run a story on her suspected murder. There have been no reports of the incident, and it's almost like it never happened. The Alaska ACLU and the Alaska Bar Association have never returned any of her family's emails or calls. They did, however, receive photos from the crime scene that were sent after months of waiting that included images of the 2 knives that the APD said were used in the assault. Neither of the knives have any blood on them, although the police department alleges that Elizabeth used them to stab herself multiple times and have refused to check for fingerprints. Surprisingly, the only news article to be found about the incident is a very short clip which doesn't even mention her name. The homicide department closed her case in October of 2020, stating that they have no suspects and her death is not listed as a homicide or suicide. Her family has a petition at change.org seeking justice for her family and need just a few more signatures. As of today, her family still seeks answers as to what really happened the day Elizabeth died. 2 days before Christmas, on the morning of December 23, 1974, 17-year-old Mary Rachel Trlica, 14-year-old Lisa Renee Wilson, and 9-year-old Julie Ann Mosley piled into Rachel's beige Oldsmobile and headed for the Seminary South Shopping Center in Fort Worth, Texas to go shopping. When the mall closed later that night, Rachel's 1972 Oldsmobile 98 was in the Sears parking lot with Christmas gifts locked inside it, but the girls were nowhere to be found. And the disappearance of the trio has remained one of Fort Worth's biggest unsolved mysteries for nearly 5 decades and has become widely known as the missing Fort Worth trio. Mary was the oldest of the three and was known by her middle name Rachel. She had been married for 6 months at the time of her disappearance to 22-year-old Tommy Trlica and was his second wife. She was still a student at Southwest High School in Fort Worth. She left that day with plans to buy Christmas presents for her 2-year-old stepson, Sean. 14-year-old Lisa was also known by her middle name, Renee, and had recently started dating Julie's older brother. 9-year-old Julie begged to go with them that day because she was bored. They planned to be back by 4 p.m. because Renee had a Christmas party that she was very excited to attend with her new boyfriend. The girls headed to a surplus store in Fort Worth to pick up some layaway items that Renee had waiting. From there, they headed to the Seminary South Shopping Center. They definitely made it inside the mall because several witnesses had reported seeing them. When the girls didn't return home, their families became concerned and traveled to Seminary South to search for them and located the car in the Sears upper-level parking lot. Rachel and Renee's families lived only a few blocks away from each other in a middle-class neighborhood in South Fort Worth known as Greenbrier. The two families often went camping together and took trips to Benbrook Lake every month when the weather was nice. Rachel was particularly close to Renee, who was 2 grades below her at Southwest High School. Some of their family remained until the mall closed, hoping to see the girls return from wherever they had mysteriously gone to. They even had them paged throughout the mall until it closed at 11 p.m. When they didn't return, the police were contacted and they presumed the girls were runaways, but the car was not dusted for fingerprints. The day after they went missing, Christmas Eve, Rachel's husband Tommy and Renee's older sister Deborah arrived to Rachel's family's home with a note. The note was supposedly from Rachel and had arrived at her home that day. It read, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel." But their families just weren't buying it. When examined closely, the handwriting in the actual letter seems different than the handwriting on the envelope. The letter is signed Rachel, but it appears that the final L had been traced back over as if she had begun to spell her own name incorrectly with 2 E's at the end. It is of note that Renee's name has 2 E's at the end. Either way, the envelope was formally addressed to Thomas A. Trlica. Rachel addressed her husband as Tommy, as did everyone else, not Thomas A. Trlica. The letter was sent to the FBI 3 times, and each time they asked for more and more samples of her writing. All attempts came back inconclusive. It was determined that the letter was written by a right-handed person, and Rachel was left-handed. The postmark on the envelope was blurry. The first 4 postal service numbers are 7608, but the final number is indecipherable. It is perhaps a faded 8, but also looks like an inverted 3. If the final number were an 8, making the zip code 76088, then the letter would have come from Weatherford, Texas, which is about 40 minutes west of Fort Worth. The final number being an inverted 3 initially seems unlikely, as 76083 is not currently an active zip code, but records show that in 1974, the zip code for Throckmorton, Texas was 76083 before it was changed years later. Neither Weatherford nor Throckmorton is on the way to Houston. Despite receiving the letter, the families did not believe that it was written by Rachel, nor that the girls had run away. The letter was postmarked December 24th, the day it was received, which is impossible, especially at that time. Many years after their disappearances, Rachel's brother Rusty received a call from a woman believing she could be Julie. She was skeptical of some things about her past and believed she was abducted as a child. When she saw a picture of a young Julie online, she tracked down Rusty and sent him a picture of herself. Julie's own mother thought that the woman was her daughter, but a DNA test came back negative. When Rusty discovered that convicted serial kidnapper Mike DeBartoleben, known notoriously as the Mall Passer, had lived only minutes away from Rachel's house around the time of their disappearances, he looked into it, but no evidence was found. Rusty would tell Blog Talk Radio in 2013 that he's been in the house and has gone through it all, even the attic, but he found nothing. Renee's father, in an interview, recounted about being fed up with the lack of progress made by the police until one day, officers told him and his wife that they had a tip that the girls' bodies were at the bottom of a well in Aledo and that the police were heading over there to check it out. Richard decided that he would follow the officers unbeknownst to them. Instead of going to Aledo, the officers allegedly traveled directly to the Paris coffee shop on the near south side. Richard parked across the street at Shorty Brown's barbershop and waited. From the coffee shop, the officers allegedly returned to the station and called the Wilsons to tell them that nothing had come of the tip about the well. Someone decided to take a closer look into young Rachel's husband, Tommy. On August 23, 1971, he married Shauna Ford, and the couple had a son they named Sean. On April 26, 1974, he and Shauna filed for divorce. Within the next 43 days following the divorce, he went from being engaged with Rachel's older sister Deborah to being married to Rachel herself. Rumor has it that Deborah and Tommy remained secretly seeing one another, and some speculate the two were involved in the girls' disappearances, which they vehemently deny. Less than 2 years later, Tommy requested a divorce from Rachel on the grounds of abandonment. On December 15, 1976, he married Josephine Beck, who was also 17 years old, and the two were divorced by June of 1978. Less than 3 months later, he married 23-year-old Ruby Fox. Tommy now lives in South Texas and has been married to his current wife, Linda, for over 40 years. Tommy's marriage applications to Josephine and Ruby were both conducted in the same city, Weatherford, Texas, zip code 76088. Both applications requested that the marriage licenses be sent to the same address in Throckmorton, Texas, zip code 76083. A deed showed Tommy buying a house in Throckmorton and including Rachel's name in the deed. The document was dated May of 1976, nearly 17 months after Rachel disappeared. In an email, Tommy says that Rusty Arnold has done nothing but lie and put money in his pocket from this. To answer your question, I had nothing to do with the disappearance of my wife. I have done everything that law enforcement has asked me to do. When comparing the letter that Tommy mysteriously received the day after the girls went missing to a letter he himself wrote years later in regards to his son, some believe that it is shockingly very similar. There were several witness accounts of the girls at the mall the day they went missing. A store clerk came forward and said that a woman told her that she had seen the girls being forced into a yellow pickup truck with lights on top of it near Buddy's grocery store at the mall. This witness, however, could never be located by police, and this story never verified. In 1981, years after the disappearances, a man said he had been in the parking lot that day and had seen a man forcing a girl into a van. The man in the van told him it was a family dispute and to stay out of it. In April 2001, Bill Hutchins, a former Fort Worth policeman and security guard at the Seminary South Sears outlet, said that he saw the three girls with the security guard on the night they disappeared. Another witness came forward and claimed he had seen the girls in a security patrol car that day. Their surviving loved ones have not given up the fight to find answers. All parents of the girls have passed away except Rachel's mother, Fran Langston, who is in her 80s now. The girls have never been found, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Brenda Louise Condon was born in 1962 and would go missing just a couple days shy of turning 29 years old. At the time, she was a divorced mother of 2 who lived with her father, Thomas Condon. She, on the other hand, lived with her boyfriend of 2 years, Greg Palazzari, at 1959 Harvest Circle in State College, Pennsylvania. Not only did she run a home cleaning service, but she also worked as a bartender at the now defunct Carlsbad Tavern, located in a rural area at 1796 Zion Road on State Route 550 in Spring Township, just 2 miles north of Bellefonte. She was last seen around 1 a.m. on February 27, 1991, at this bar. Later that day, when other employees arrived for their shift, the bar had been strangely left unlocked, and they noticed Brenda's gray 1986 Mercury Capri was still in the parking lot. There was no sign of robbery or any struggle inside the bar, but Brenda's black cowboy boots were located neatly arranged in the men's bathroom. She was reported missing the same day she disappeared, but police didn't actually begin looking for her until March 2nd after she missed a visitation period with her children, which was very unlike her. Authorities are still looking to question 3 men who were at the tavern the evening she disappeared. It is not known if any of these men are connected to her case, but they are simply wanted for questioning. Sketches were created of these 3 men, and it's unknown what makes authorities want to interview them. It was a slow night at the bar, and these men are the only patrons the police have not been able to identify. There are also certain acquaintances of Brenda's that have not been very cooperative with the investigation, but none of them have been named publicly, and none are being called suspects in her disappearance at this time. Her boyfriend at the time, Greg Palazzari, passed away in 2016 at the age of 60. He was arrested in 2009 for cocaine distribution. At that time, police asked him again if he had any information on Brenda's disappearance, which he denied. There are no public records available that point to him having any possible involvement. The location of Carlsbad Tavern is now the location of the Robin Hood Brewing Company. There have strangely been many women go missing or murdered in or around the same area that Brenda went missing from. On March 22, 1993, 17-year-old runaway Dawn Marie Birnbaum from Poland Springs, Maine, was found less than a mile from where Brenda had gone missing 2 years earlier. She had been picked up and murdered by a long-distance truck driver named James Robert Cruz Jr. He's suspected to be a serial killer responsible for many murders along his trucking route in the Midwest and the East, and he is currently serving life in prison for Dawn's murder. He also bears a stunning resemblance to the composite sketch of one of the 3 men who were allegedly at the bar on the night of Brenda's disappearance. His ex-wife Sheila stated that she found similar rope with knots in a shed at her residence after he was arrested that was also found at Dawn's crime scene. In October of 1992, Dawn Miller also went missing from Bellefonte. Somehow, her case slipped through the cracks, and years later, authorities of Bellefonte didn't even know they had a missing person case. Her mother reported her missing in Williamsport, where Dawn lived. Authorities in Williamsport told her to report her missing in Bellefonte, where her daughter was staying with her boyfriend. Neither precinct would initially take responsibility for her missing persons case. It wasn't until her mother went to the local news that Williamsport took on the case. But in 2008, her boyfriend Greg confessed that he and his nephew Joe killed her after she told him she was pregnant. Greg later killed himself, and Joe was never charged due to lack of evidence, and to this day, her remains have never been found. Jennifer Cahill Shadle was last seen leaving a Walmart store on North Atherton Street in State College on May 15, 2014. Horn Chang Key went missing from State College in 2016. Dana Bailey was found murdered on March 5, 1987, in her State College apartment on South Allen Street. Sadly, her mother was the one who discovered her daughter's body in a horrific scene. Cindy Song was last seen on November 1, 2000, outside her apartment at the State College Park Apartments. As of March 2022, all these cases from the State College, Pennsylvania area remain unsolved.